The title of our sermon today is Rest in the Lord. Our passage of scripture comes from Psalms 62, 1 through 2. Truly my soul finds rest in God, my salvation comes from him. Truly he is my rock and my salvation, he is my fortress. I will never be shaken. We started out this series talking about the essentials that are necessary so that we can continue to have physical life on this planet. We learned that as physical beings, we have 5 essential needs: air, water, food, shelter, and rest. We also learned that these 5 essential needs for physical life can translate into 5 essential needs for our spiritual lives. The first week we learned that God breathes life into our very being, giving us direction and filling our hearts with his purpose. Week 2 gave us insight into living water and how that water is abundant, satisfying, refreshing, and free. Next, we talked about the bread of life and how God thinks of us as more glorious than any other creature. If he takes care of the birds of the air, how can we believe that he won't meet our physical needs and spiritual needs? And by feeding us the bread of life, God gives us an abundance, expecting us to feed those around us. And last week we talked about the shelter of God and how that shelter is always with us, protecting us when our way might seem dark. We learned that the shelter of God travels with us as we go about the work of God, giving us peace of mind so that we're able to focus on ministering to others. We say that in the second verse of our scripture today. Truly, he is my rock and my salvation. He is my fortress, and I will never be shaken. Today, let's talk about what it means to rest in the Lord. I want to let you know that I've struggled with this sermon. It is a very apt and appropriate conclusion for our study on spiritual essentials, but I have to admit that it's difficult to work on sermons where I know that I fall so short on the subject. If you ask anyone that knows me in the southwest region of the Disciples of Christ, they will tell you I am the worst when it comes to self-care. I have a tendency to push myself way beyond my physical, mental, and spiritual limits, thinking that doing this is what God expects of me when nothing could be further from the truth. But do know that I am a work in progress, and with God's patient instruction, I'm getting better at self-care. There are stories that have circulated for years regarding cars abandoned in the deserts of Egypt. It seems that when the royal family realized how wealthy they were due to the oil fields, they had a tendency to buy the best products on the market, including vehicles. They would buy high-end cars like Rolls-Royce and Bentley, and they would drive them on long trips in the desert heat. However, automotive maintenance seemed to be unknown to them, and many of these vehicles died in the desert, mostly from lack of oil. Often the vehicles were just abandoned in the sand. Nobody's going to argue that Rolls-Royce or Bentley do not build excellent automobiles. They are superior in every way, but even the best vehicles on the market have to be maintained or they will become worthless pieces of junk. Maintenance is key to keeping these automobiles in top shape and up to performance standards. This is the way it is with our bodies, minds, and spirits. Our lives are in constant need of maintenance. We need to be conscious and alert to what our bodies, minds, and spirits are telling us in order to keep our lives in top shape and up to performance standards. Nutrition, exercise, and rest are all part of that routine. Even those like me with low-end bodies and need constant maintenance, so that we need to continue to function. How can we go about God's work if we don't take care of the bodies that house our spirits? Now I'll tell you up front, no matter how much we maintain our bodies, most of us will never have an artist want to capture our physical prowess. But in truth, God doesn't expect that of us. He doesn't expect for us to maintain the bodies He has given to us so that we can go about His purpose effectively. Eating right, getting exercise, and making sure that we get enough exercise and physical rest are all integral to keeping our minds and bodies fit. And yes, rest is a key factor. A body and mind without rest becomes less functional. Several weeks ago, I mentioned that the longest recorded time for an individual to go without sleep is 11 days. That is phenomenal to me. I once went a week without sleep, and I know what a wreck I was. I was so sick, I was running a fever, barely able to move, and much less function in any capacity. I accomplished what I had to accomplish, but the price was horrendous. I know that I could not have gone another day. So when I think about someone going 11 days without sleep, I'm mortified. God does not expect for us to function at peak levels without rest. We want to believe that He does, but that's just not the case. We impose unrealistic deadlines on ourselves and then complain because we are tired and worn out. God never wanted it that way, which is why He gave us the Sabbath. Let me ask you a tricky question. When God created the heavens and earth, did He rest on the seventh day because He had to or because He wanted to? And let's go back into Genesis 2:2-3. By the seventh day, God finished the work He had been doing, and so on the seventh day He rested from all His work. Then God blessed the seventh day, made it holy, because on it He rested from all the work of creating that He had done. Now I ask you, did God rest on the seventh day because He had to or because He wanted to? Are we willing to imply that God may have limits and thus get tired? Or do we want to believe that God knew the nature of the creation and the limits of these mortal bodies, and in knowing this, provided us as an example, as a mandate for us to follow? When the Ten Commandments are laid out in Exodus 20 and Deuteronomy 5, God spends more time on the Sabbath than any other commandment. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall work and do all your shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you will not do any work, neither you nor your sons or daughters, nor your male or female servant, nor your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but He rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And the penalty for not observing the Sabbath and keeping it holy was death. But then Jesus turns right around and says in Luke 14:5, then He asked them, if one of you has a child or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull it out? God knew from the beginning that if He didn't set some boundaries, we would work ourselves to death. Not only that, we would work everyone else around us to death. By nature, we are driven to acquire more than we have, and often at the expense of personal relationships. We are also disappointed at times when we feel someone else is not living up to their potential or meeting their obligations by committing themselves to their work. Too often we feel that it is our place to judge them. It's also true that we compare the Old Covenant to the New Covenant. The rules regarding the Sabbath seem to be the ones that are so very rigidly enforced when it came to others, but so flexible when it comes to ourselves. Maybe that is because the commandments regarding the Sabbath was the one that the Sadducees and the Pharisees constantly accused Jesus of violating. It was also the commandment with the most additional constraints attached to it, and the Jewish leaders seemed to work hard at finding ways to avoid the laws regarding the Sabbath rather than embracing the Sabbath. Let's face it, If your child fell into the well on the Sabbath and you did nothing to rescue the child because it violated the law of working on the Sabbath, and the child dies, does that raise you up in the eyes of God for following the law, or does that make God a bad God for coming up with such a law that would force you to make a decision on whether to spare your child or obey the Sabbath? Or possibly our perception of the law of the Sabbath is warped and needs further examination. The law of the Sabbath is not a commandment that does not seem to be related to action either towards God or our fellow man. It seems to be directed intentionally at us as individuals regarding our needs. God found it imperative that we find time to rest. He knew that without rest, our bodies would wind up like those Rolls Royces in the desert, dead and abandoned. Just because we have a new covenant does not mean that we can just ignore the purpose behind the old covenant, as convenient as it might be. There is wisdom and truth in the old covenant that suggests that maybe there is intent and purpose there beyond our comprehension, but begging for our attention. We want to rest on Sunday, but we also want to go out and shop, eat, and play. We truly want to rest, but there is so much that we did not get done during the week, and it's a great time to catch up on the chores. There are things that might be considered work, but are actually relaxing for us. For instance, are we working on the car because we find joy in working on the car, or because if we don't work on the car, we're not going to make it to work on Monday? How much of it is work and how much of it is pleasure? Are we working in the yard because we like working in the yard? Or because the lawn has to get mowed and Sunday afternoon seems to be the only time we can get it done? And how much of the work that we do on Sunday is due to the fact that we just didn't get around to it earlier in the week, even though we know we had the opportunity? Is the work that we are doing relaxing and pleasurable? Does it relieve stress in our lives? Yeah, but in truth, it's not about Sunday. It's not about the Sabbath. It's not about Saturday. It's not about any of that. We think that it is because we're trying to base it on the law rather than on intent, and it's about rest. And our realization that God not only wants us to rest, He demands it. And when He demands it, He is not talking figuratively. He also expects for us to get our spiritual rest. I know you're going to ask me, what is spiritual rest? Because of the nature of our humanness, we pick up baggage on a regular basis, spiritual baggage. This baggage comes in a variety of forms, but it is as heavy as the physical baggage we carry when we don't take care of our bodies. Spiritual baggage comes to us in the guise of grief, guilt, shame, loneliness, peer pressure, abandonment, put-downs, depression, self-pity, heartache, feeling unappreciated or underappreciated, feelings of worthlessness, and so many other things. Anything that weighs you down spiritually, that burdens you. So many of us are feeling that we have to carry that around with us, that it is part of who we are. These spiritual burdens can make us feel tired and worn out physically. They can make us mentally exhausted. They can make us sick. It is extremely hard to let go of these things because we feel that we are entitled to carry them. They are heavy chains that bind our feet and take their toll on our minds and bodies. They also make us feel distant from our Creator and cause us to ask questions like, why would God ever love me? Who am I that the Creator of the universe could even care about what's going on in my life? But God never intended for us to carry all that baggage around. In the Old Testament, David addresses this in Psalm 55:22, when he says, cast your burden upon the Lord and He will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved. When Jesus came into the world, one of his main purposes was to help each and every one of us deal with those burdens, to help us find rest from constantly having to carry worry, guilt, and depression around with us. And so he gave us a way to deal with it. Matthew 11:28-30 says, "Come to me, all ye who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." Jesus never states that we will be burden-free while we're on this planet. But he does give us a way to deal with those burdens that are much lighter when you allow someone to help carry them. These verses are not just for the unsaved. They're for all of us, because each and every day brings the possibility of a burden that will overwhelm us. We must daily, even as Christians, bring our burdens and concerns and lay them at the foot of the cross and leave them there. These verses are not just about forgiveness, even though sin can make us tired and heavy. They are more about love and compassion that Christ has for us, and how he will take those burdens and concerns off of our shoulders so that we can find rest for our spirits. This message will help all people remind us that Christ stands in the gap for us, that God has used him to build a bridge that doesn't just provide a path for us, but also allows us to find joy on that path. The universal message that Jesus Christ is always there to help carry our burdens, a message that we need to not only take to heart in ourselves, but to share with everyone around us. And because Christ does this for us, he expects us to follow his example and do the same thing for those around us. When we read our scripture today, we understand how God wants us to pursue rest. Truly, my soul finds rest in God. My salvation comes from him. We know that God will give us rest because of our relationship with him, the graciousness of his salvation, the ever-present nudging of the Holy Spirit. But I want to close with a passage from Galatians that compels us to take that message to the next level. Galatians 6:2. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. In other words, if our goal is to follow Christ and to live by his example, then we must become like him by sharing the burdens of those around us. By carrying each other's burdens, we provide rest for them as well. How can we do that? We are only human. We must take time to remember that we've been looking for the last 5 weeks, that God will breathe into us to sustain and invigorate us. He will provide us with living water that is abundant, satisfying, refreshing, and free. He will nourish us with the bread of life and will make our table overflow so that there will be plenty for us to nourish those around us. He will provide shelter and protection no matter where we are, so that we too can shelter others. And he encourages us to let him carry our burdens so that we can carry the burdens of those around us. Jesus set the example. Now let us lean into Jesus, rest in the Lord, so that it becomes second nature in our lives to reach out with that same promise of abundance and love to everyone we meet. Amen.